My name is Hillary Monroe. I'm 65 years old, widowed for over 2 decades, and retired after teaching high school literature for almost 30 years in a quiet town in Oregon. I live in the same house my late husband, Jonathan, and I bought when our children were still young enough to fall asleep on the couch after cartoons. It creaks when the wind hits just right and smells like old wood and vanilla. To me, it has always smelled like home. I suppose the fall itself wasn't all that dramatic. One careless step on a wet kitchen tile, one misplaced foot, and I was down before I could say, damn. I remember the sound of the porcelain bowl shattering on the floor beside me, spaghetti sauce smeared like blood. Everything after that was a blur of hospital lights and murmured voices. They said it was a minor concussion, just a precautionary overnight stay, nothing serious. But what I heard during that stay, that's what cracked something deep inside me. I'd barely opened my eyes when I heard my daughter, Laura, my firstborn, my pride, outside my curtain speaking far too clearly on her phone. "If Mom doesn't come back from this fully functional," she said with a strange chill in her voice, "we need to think about what to do with the house. It's just sitting there wasting value." I mean, it's not like she needs all that space anymore. Her words didn't sound cruel exactly, just calculated, practical. But to hear them while I was still in the hospital bed, barely conscious, something twisted in my chest. Later that day, her husband, Tom, arrived, all buttoned up and polished like he was about to negotiate a contract instead of visiting his sick mother-in-law. I overheard him ask the doctor, not even discreetly, in the event that she doesn't recover mental competency, what's the process for establishing guardianship over her estate? I stared at the beige ceiling tiles for a long time after that. Then came Emily, Brian's wife, sweet on the outside, always smiling. "Did anyone check if your mom had a will?" she asked Brian at my bedside as if I couldn't hear. "We should probably know that just in case." Brian said nothing, just shifted awkwardly in the chair next to her, my sweet son, always looking down when things got uncomfortable. The boy I once carried into his first day of kindergarten because he wouldn't stop crying, that boy was long gone. They all thought I was sleeping or worse, fading. But I was listening. Every word that night in the sterile silence of my hospital room, I made a decision that would change everything. I would pretend I had memory loss, complete, quiet, polite confusion. Not the kind that scares people off, but the kind that makes them lower their guard and show you who they really are. Only two people would know the truth: Mary, my best friend of 40 years who was more like a sister, and Dr. Keller, a former student of mine, now a trusted physician. Mary tried to talk me out of it gently, the way she always does. "You don't need to test them to know what they are, Hill," she said, her hand gripping mine. "I do," I whispered back, "because I need to know if they see me as a person or just a problem." What they didn't know was that Jonathan had made me promise never to tell that I had nearly $9 million in long-held shares from his old tech firm. The money wasn't flashy. It wasn't in any visible bank account. He left it for me to grow old with dignity, to be used only if I needed it. "Don't tell the kids," he'd warned me once, his voice tired but firm. "Not unless they've proven they won't use you to get it." I never planned to test them, not like this, until I had to. The first few days back home were a strange theater. Laura fluttered about the kitchen like a concerned angel, fussing over my vitamins and appointments. Emily brought flowers and passive-aggressive comments wrapped in lace. Tom asked more questions about my daily routines than any son-in-law ever should. But it was Oliver, my 12-year-old grandson, who broke my heart in the gentlest way. He crawled into my lap one afternoon, nestled his cheek against my shoulder, and said softly, "I like you better this way, Grandma. You don't make me practice piano or check my spelling anymore." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Mostly, I wanted to scream that I was still in here, that I hadn't gone anywhere. That night, I stood alone in the bathroom, staring at my own face in the mirror. My eyes were still sharp, my skin looser now, the deep lines around my mouth no longer softened by joy. I reached up, touched the glass, and whispered, "I'm still here, even if no one sees me." I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too rehearsed in its stillness, like even the floorboards were pretending not to creak. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the words from the hospital still echoing in my head. If Mom doesn't come back fully functional, does she have a will? Guardianship process. It played over and over, a loop of betrayal softened only by Oliver's small arms around me. Earlier that day, I closed my eyes, willing myself not to feel it, but the ache came anyway. And like it often does in the middle of the night, memory crept in. There was a time when this house wasn't filled with tension, but with laughter, the echoes of Laura's violin practice, Brian's comic book battles staged in the hallway, the soft jazz Jonathan loved playing on Sunday mornings. I used to sit by the window with a stack of essays to grade and coffee gone cold, watching my children race through the backyard like wild animals. I was a mother, yes, but also a teacher, a woman with a mind and a voice. I taught literature at the local high school for 28 years, Shakespeare, Baldwin, and Steinbeck. I was offered administrative positions more than once, assistant principal, even curriculum director, but I never took them. I loved the classroom too much. I loved watching young people wrestle with truth and metaphor and leave my room slightly more curious than when they arrived. I was good at it. Maybe too good. Sometimes I wonder if I gave too much of myself to students and not enough to my own family. Emily Jonathan understood he always did. He was a software engineer, quiet and brilliant, with a sense of humor so dry it went unnoticed unless you were paying close attention. He died when he was 50, pancreatic cancer, the thief that it is. One day he was jogging in the neighborhood, the next he was too tired to lift a mug. By the time we caught it, it was already taking him apart from the inside. He had 6 months. I didn't cry at his funeral, not because I wasn't broken, but because I was too busy holding everyone else together. Laura was 17 then, already hardening into the woman she is now, sharp, capable, beautiful, but with a coldness even then I didn't know how to melt. She grieved by throwing herself into ambition, Ivy League applications, business school, networking. At 20, I was proud and terrified because I could see her building a world that didn't have room for softness. The first real fracture between us came 10 years ago. Laura wanted me to invest in a property she was buying with some friends in Portland, some transformative opportunity, she called it. I read the prospectus. It was slick and full of buzzwords, but the numbers didn't sit right. I told her no, calmly, clearly, without judgment. You don't trust me, she said. I trust you, I replied, but not this deal. She never asked me for money again, but from that day forward, something behind her eyes shifted. She started talking to me like I was an obstacle, not a parent. And then there was Brian, my baby, my sensitive boy, the one who wrote poetry in middle school and cried when the neighbor's dog died. Somewhere along the line, that tenderness turned inward. After his father died, he unraveled. He dropped out of college, started drifting between jobs, then fell into pills. I remember driving him to rehab, his body thin, his jaw clenched, silence thick between us. You think this will fix me? He spat, not looking at me. I think this will give you a chance, I said. He got clean for a while, then relapsed, got clean again, but something in him never fully came back. His resentment grew, resentment toward rules, toward expectations, and eventually toward me. You just want a son you can show off, he told me one Thanksgiving when I refused to give him money. I want a son who wants to be well, I whispered, holding back tears. I don't know who he blames more, me for pushing or himself for stumbling. Emily entered our lives a few years after that, sweet voice, polished manners, a kind of weaponized grace. He called me Mom almost immediately, hugged me often, always warm. But something about it felt intentional, the kind of woman who always knows which room she's in and how to own it. I wanted to love her. I tried, but she asked questions more than she offered stories. How big is this house again? Did Jonathan leave a lot behind? You must have had a great pension, right? At the time, I chalked it up to curiosity, but now I see it was always about information, positioning, strategy. And poor Mary, she's the only person who's ever stood with me without expecting something. She brought groceries when I had the flu, held my hand through Jonathan's last breath, and watched Oliver when I needed to nap between chemo treatments during my own cancer scare. She's a good woman, and now Laura, my own daughter, blames her for everything. "You're the reason my mother distrusts her own children," she hissed at Mary once, thinking I wasn't within earshot. Mary just smiled the way only a woman who's buried her pride for peace can do. Later that week, Brian muttered as he passed me in the hallway, "You're always in the way, you know that?" I didn't reply. I just looked at him and saw a boy still lost in a man's body. He couldn't meet my gaze. Emily, always the actress, brought me tea that evening, sat down beside me and patted my hand. "We're just worried about your future, Mom," she said softly. "We just want to make sure everything's in place." "What do you mean?" I asked in my best blank, foggy voice. "Well," she smiled like wills and things, "it's not about money, of course. It's just about peace of mind, mine or yours." I wanted to ask, but I stayed silent because silence, I was learning, reveals more than questions ever could. That night, I found Jonathan's last letter. I'd kept it in a small box beneath my bed, buried beneath old scarves and church programs. The envelope was worn, but the ink was still fresh, his handwriting steady and strong. "Don't let the pain harden you," he wrote. "Don't let it make you cold. Love them even if it hurts, but don't let them take the parts of you I loved most. Your kindness, your light, your fire." I read it twice, then again, and then I tucked it back in the box, my fingers trembling not from age, but from something deeper. Not fear, not yet, but something close. The morning after, I reread Jonathan's letter. The air felt sharper as though something invisible had shifted. The fog in my mind, real or feigned, had cleared. I made my tea just like always, sweetened with a single spoon of honey, and sat by the window pretending not to notice the way Laura walked through my house like it was already hers. She had brought pastries I didn't ask for and suggestions I hadn't invited. "We need to clear some of this clutter, Mom," she said in that falsely cheerful tone people use when they're trying to act like they're helping. "Too many little things lying around. It's dangerous, especially for someone in your condition." I smiled faintly, blinking slowly. Condition? She didn't even look up from the stack of books she was rearranging. "You know what I mean. Don't worry, I've got it handled." The books weren't clutter, they were mine. Some still had Jonathan's notes in the margins from when he stayed up late reading beside me. I said nothing, but something in me started ticking, the kind of slow, patient ticking that knew exactly where it would end. That day, I started placing a small digital recorder under the doily on the kitchen table, another behind the curtain rod in the living room. I had kept them from my days as a teacher for when students tried to challenge a grade. My parents accused me of favoritism. I knew how to gather quiet proof. I just never imagined needing it in my own home from my own family. Oliver came over after school, still in his red sneakers and grass-stained jeans. He threw his backpack onto the couch like always and climbed into the chair across from me, dangling his legs. He had his father's eyes, Brian's, when Brian still smiled like he believed in something. He pulled a comic book from his bag, but hesitated. Then, with that disarming honesty only children possess, he said, "Mom says you don't know what's going on anymore." I raised an eyebrow, slowly keeping my voice light. "Oh, what did she say exactly?" He looked down, kicking the air. "She said not to worry if you say weird stuff, that you don't really get things now." He shrugged. "She said not to get scared if you forget my name or something." I placed my hand over his and squeezed gently. "What if I promise I'll never forget your name?" He looked at me wide-eyed. "Even if you get really, really old?" "Especially then," I said, and he smiled. Emily arrived shortly after, all perfume and pastel sweaters. She greeted me with her usual syrupy sweetness, then began wandering from room to room, opening drawers she had no reason to touch. I thought I might help organize some things. She said the garage, The attic, that hallway closet, so many old boxes we could clear space and make the house safer for you. I nodded vaguely, folding my hands in my lap, watching as she lingered by the grand piano. It hadn't been played properly in years, not since Jonathan. She ran her fingers over the lid like she was considering something. 2 days later, a man in a navy polo arrived mid-morning. Antique appraiser, Emily explained without looking at me. We're just curious what it might be worth, for insurance purposes. I let her talk. I even made coffee for the man while he poked around the ivory keys and scribbled in a little notepad. I wondered if he realized the woman standing quietly beside him could play Beethoven from memory. Later that evening, I listened to the recordings. Laura's voice was sharp, cutting through the static like glass. If she doesn't improve, we have to act. I talked to Tom. Once we establish cognitive decline, we can start the guardianship process. Brian responded with a grunt. And the house? She won't need it. That's what a facility is for. And let's be honest, she barely uses the whole thing now. We'd be doing everyone a favor. Pause. Then it'll be ours, all of it. We just have to be careful with timing. I sat in the dark after that, not crying. Tears felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. But I felt something deeper, something older, that strange fusion of sorrow and rage that lives somewhere between betrayal and mourning. I went to the closet and pulled out my sewing kit, the one Laura had told me to throw away years ago. You never sew anymore, she'd said. It's just taking up space. But I kept it tucked behind coats and memories. I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light and I filled out a square of linen with slow, practiced hands. I embroidered Oliver's name in deep blue thread. Small but sturdy, a gift for his birthday. Something real, something he could touch and hold. Even when the world felt full of pretend. The next day, Tom stopped by. His tie was perfectly knotted. His briefcase was sleek. He spoke like he was discussing a new client instead of my life. Just some forms, Mom, he said. Standard things. Durable power of attorney, health proxy, just so we're covered. I stared at the papers. Legal words blurred together. My name appeared too many times. I don't understand, I said softly, keeping my tone clouded. He smiled reassuringly. It's just to keep things in order. You wouldn't want anyone taking advantage of you, right? I wanted to laugh. That night, I sat in my room and looked at the photograph of Jonathan and me on our wedding day. It had faded over the years. Our faces softened by time, but I still remembered how his hand had trembled when he touched mine. How he'd whispered, "We'll grow old together or apart, but with love." I touched the frame lightly. My voice barely audible. Am I doing the right thing, John? There was no answer, of course. Just silence and the weight of everything he left me to carry. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls were still the same soft sage I painted after Jonathan passed. The wooden floors still held the same familiar creaks, but the air had changed. It was thicker now, heavier. Like it knew something I didn't want to admit. They scheduled a family discussion for Saturday evening. That's what Laura called it, her tone clipped and managerial, like she was arranging a quarterly meeting. Not planning the next chapter of my life without asking me. She brought her laptop, Tom brought a folder, and Emily arrived early. With wine and a store-bought dessert, she sat on the counter with forced cheer. Brian showed up late as always. Hair unkempt, sleeves wrinkled. He looked at me like he wanted to say something but changed his mind. That's how he is lately. Half gestures and unfinished sentences. They sat around the dining table like a board of trustees, evaluating an underperforming employee. I took my usual place at the head, hands folded in my lap, eyes low. I kept my face soft, vague. I had to. Tom began, clearing his throat, always the designated mouthpiece. When Laura didn't want to appear cold. Hillary, we've been thinking a lot about what's best for your comfort, your safety. It's time we consider long-term care options, Laura chimed in without waiting. A memory care facility, the one we toured in Beaverton, has a great reputation. Very clean, very modern, 24-hour staff. It would take the pressure off everyone. Pressure off whom I wanted to ask. Instead, I blinked at her, tilting my head like I didn't understand. Brian leaned forward. If we wait too long, Mom, the house could lose value. The market's shifting. We could get ahead of it now. Use the proceeds to fund her care. He trailed off, avoiding my gaze. I noticed he didn't say or care. I hid her as if I weren't in the room. Emily placed her hand over mine gently. And this house is too big for one person anyway. Too many stairs, too many chances to fall again. We're just worried. She smiled, but her eyes were calculating, watching for my reaction. I like my room, Oliver said quietly from the corner. He had been coloring in a sketchbook, mostly ignored. I don't want to go to a facility. Laura laughed under her breath. You're not going anywhere, sweetie. We're talking about Grandma. Then she turned back to me and added, no one lives forever, Mom, especially not in this state. I stared at the grain of the wooden table, tracing it with my eyes, willing myself not to flinch. They thought I was lost in confusion, but I heard every word, every inflection, every thinly veiled insult disguised as concern. The conversation shifted to logistics, how to sell the house discreetly, how to transfer accounts, how to notify neighbors without alarming them. They spoke as if I had already disappeared, as if I had become paperwork and property. I sat through it all without a word. Later that night, while the house was silent again, I took out the little gift I'd been working on in secret. Oliver's birthday was in 2 weeks, but I wasn't sure I'd still be here by then. So I finished wrapping the small wooden box I'd painted myself. Inside it was the embroidered handkerchief with his name stitched in blue and a silver compass Jonathan once kept on his desk. So you'll always know where home is, I planned to tell him, but I knew there was a good chance I'd have to leave the message in a note instead. I tucked the gift beneath a loose floorboard in the back bedroom, his favorite hide-and-seek spot. I made a silent promise to myself. If they took me before his birthday, I'd find a way to get it to him, even if I had to pretend to forget my name while doing it. The next morning, Mary came by. She always knew when something was wrong. Before I said a word, she brought apple muffins in her usual quiet steadiness. They met, I said, sitting at the kitchen table while she poured coffee. I know, she said. Laura called me last night, wanted to loop me in as if I were part of some project management chain. I looked down, pressing a napkin between my fingers. She said I should prepare you emotionally, Mary added, her voice tightening. Like you were a puppy being sent away. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Mary reached across the table and gripped my hand. You don't deserve this, Hill. I raised them. I whispered, how did I get it so wrong? You didn't. They chose comfort over character. That's not your sin to carry. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but swallowed it back. There was no room left for softness, not yet. Later that day, I saw Emily kneeling in the hallway with Oliver. They didn't see me standing by the stairwell. Her voice was sweet, like melted sugar. Grandma forgets things now, right? She asked him. Oliver nodded, unsure. She sometimes tells stories that aren't true anymore, huh? He hesitated. That's okay, sweetheart. You just have to be helpful. Like, if she hides things or says something silly, you should tell Mommy and Daddy so we can help her, okay? He nodded again quietly. My heart clenched. She was turning him into a spy, innocently, unknowingly. She was poisoning his trust in me. It was so subtle, so polite, so deliberate. That evening, I sat in the living room alone. The house felt like a stage just after the curtain falls. All the actors had gone home, but their voices lingered in the dim light. I picked up one of Jonathan's old books, Leaves of Grass. He had written inside the cover, for H in all seasons, find your fire when the frost comes. The frost had arrived, and I could feel the fire starting to stir again deep in my chest, slow but relentless. I didn't know how long I had before they tried to take everything, but I knew this much. They wouldn't see it coming. It started with the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. Mary had already come by the day before with her usual calm presence and cinnamon bread, still warm in the foil. The mail had already been dropped. I opened the front door slowly, the old hinges squealing a warning that no one else seemed to hear. On the porch stood a man in jeans and a windbreaker, holding a clipboard and smiling too broadly. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, stepping back as if I were fragile glass that might shatter with sound. "I'm just surveying the neighborhood for a safety audit. Mind if I ask a few questions?" I stared at him, silent. He shifted, glancing past me into the foyer. "Any elders living in the home? Anyone with cognitive issues?" I blinked twice, slow and deliberate. "Are you the homeowner?" I said nothing. He gave a rehearsed nod, clicked his pen, and retreated down the steps without ever having gotten inside. But the unease lingered long after his footsteps vanished. I watched him walk straight across the street to a silver SUV I didn't recognize and speak to someone inside. The window rolled up before I could make out the face, but I didn't need to. I knew this wasn't about neighborhood safety. It was Laura he was watching. Later that afternoon, Mary called, her voice tight, strained in a way I hadn't heard before. "A man followed me out of the bookstore today," she said. Didn't say a word, but he kept pace for 6 blocks. When I stopped to tie my shoe, he stopped too. I didn't say what we were both thinking. Laura had started her endgame, and she wasn't going to play fair. The air inside the house grew colder, heavier. Every sound felt sharper, every creak a possible mistake. Then came Oliver. He'd found my little recorder. It had slipped from behind the curtain rod in the living room, where I'd hidden it weeks ago. I didn't even notice it was missing until I walked in and saw him sitting cross-legged on the rug, fiddling with the buttons. "Grandma," he said, looking up with that proud grin only children have when they think they've found treasure. "You left this thing on." I heard Aunt Laura say the F word. My stomach dropped. "Can I play it again?" Before I could stop him, the room filled with Laura's voice, crackling but unmistakable. "If we get guardianship, we sell the house immediately. No more waiting on Mom's moods or memory lapses. She won't even notice. Then Emily and the rest of the funds. Brian's voice, she's not gonna live forever." I lunged and hit stop, yanking the recorder from his hand. He looked confused, then worried. "Am I in trouble?" he asked softly. I was about to assure him when Emily's voice drifted from the hallway behind us. "What's that, Ollie?" She walked in holding a laundry basket, moving too quickly for someone just doing chores. Her eyes locked on the device in my hand. Oliver hesitated. It was Grandma's. It had Aunt Laura's voice in it. Emily set the basket down. "Hey, she said, reaching out. I pretended not to understand, clutching it tighter, blinking like I was already somewhere else. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That evening, she cornered Oliver in the hallway. She thought I was asleep, but my bedroom door was cracked just enough. Her voice was low, sugar-laced, and sharp around the edges. "Why were you playing with things that don't belong to you?" "I didn't know," Oliver whispered. "It was just on the floor." "You're not supposed to tell people what you hear, sweetie. That's not polite." "Was it a secret?" "It was grown-up stuff. You don't want to get anyone in trouble, do you?" Then came the moment I wouldn't forget. "Do you want Grandma to go away forever?" she asked. He was silent. She lowered her voice further. "If you keep acting like this, Mommy and Daddy won't trust you anymore." I heard the soft, distinct sound of a slap. Not hard, but sharp enough to sting. Then his small voice, "Do you want her to disappear?" Silence. Then Emily's shoes clicking back down the hall and a door closing. The next morning, Tom arrived unannounced. He had a brown leather folder and that practiced expression of concern he wore when pretending to be helpful. "I've been talking to Dr. Keller," he said, sitting across from me in the sunroom. "Given the ongoing concerns about your memory, we've been working on the paperwork for a long-term declaration of incapacity. It's just a formality, really, so no one takes advantage of you." I nodded slowly, watching the light shift across the hardwood. "He's prepared to sign." We're just waiting on your primary care assessment. I knew Keller hadn't signed anything yet. He had promised me that much. But I also knew pressure could wear down even the well-intentioned. After Tom left, I pulled my journal from the bookshelf and flipped through the pages, checking for anything that might incriminate me. A list of names, a few notes about where I'd placed recorders, quotes I'd scribbled from my children's conversations, enough to raise questions. That night, I found the journal sitting on the kitchen counter. Laura's handwriting scrawled in the margin, unstable. She'd written paranoia, obsessive, dangerous to herself. She wasn't asking. I held the page for a long time, then tore it out, shredded it into pieces, and flushed them down. Own the toilet one by one. Mary came by the next morning, gripping the steering wheel with both hands longer than necessary before coming inside. Her mouth was tight, her eyes red. "They know I've been helping you," she said. "I know they're going to try to cut me out." "They already have," I replied. Mary placed a trembling hand over mine. "If you don't end this soon," she whispered, "they'll beat you to it. You can't wait until they've boxed you up and shipped you away. You're running out of time." I nodded slowly, but the weight of her words settled deeper than I'd let on. There was no safety net anymore. If I stumbled now, it would all come crashing down. Later that day, I got a call from the bank. "Mrs. Monroe," the man on the line said, "we wanted to confirm a new line of credit application in your name. $30,000 authorized by your son, Brian." I didn't speak. I just listened to the words, letting them roll over me like waves too cold to scream through. "I'm sorry," the man said, "but we need your verbal approval." Or I hung up. That night, I sat in the pew of the old stone church 3 blocks from my house. The sanctuary was empty, lit only by the dim, stained glass reflections and the soft hum of an old heater. I folded my hands, not really in prayer, but something close. I didn't ask for strength, I asked for clarity. And beneath the echo of my breath and the creak of wooden beams, I swore I heard Jonathan's voice again, quiet, steady, and so familiar it almost hurt. "Don't let them take the parts of you I loved most." Dr. Keller didn't ask questions when I handed him the note. He simply read it, folded it into his jacket pocket, and nodded. Once I had written carefully in my smallest, clearest handwriting, "Confirm mental competency in private. Do not document in shared files. Trust only yourself." He understood immediately. He always had. There had been a time years ago when he sat in my literature class and wrote poetry that trembled with sincerity. Now he wore a white coat and wielded caution like a scalpel, but I saw that same boy in his eyes when he looked at me with quiet loyalty. He arranged for a cognitive evaluation disguised as a social visit. He brought a clipboard, of course, and spoke gently, keeping his tone even as he asked me to count backward, recall a sequence, and describe a painting he pointed to on the wall. I passed, of course. I passed as I always would because I was not slipping, not yet. He gave me the tiniest nod before leaving. I didn't need a printed report. All I needed was the truth quietly confirmed and one good ally with credentials. The rest I would gather on my own. The house became a stage again, and I resumed my role with precision. I let my hands tremble slightly when pouring tea. I murmured nonsense under my breath, just loud enough to be overheard. I stared into the fireplace as if trying to remember what fire was, but every so often, I planted seeds, small truths slipped into the haze. I began humming the melody Laura used to play on the piano during her college auditions, the one she hadn't too. In 15 years, I asked Tom out of the blue whether his firm still handled estate fraud cases, just loud enough for Emily to hear from the next room. Then one afternoon, I waited until they were all seated in the living room, reviewing brochures for memory care facilities like they were choosing a spa package. I walked in, paused near the window, and said dreamily, "I hope the new owners don't mind the old oak tree. It drops limbs in October, especially after it rains." Like last year, Laura dropped her coffee. There had been a meeting, one I was never supposed to know about. Exactly a month before, on a rainy Thursday in early October, They'd gathered in secret discussing plans to sell the house, how and when to remove me, who would manage the transition. The oak tree had been mentioned casually in passing as something to deal with once the house changed hands. Laura stared at me, her face drained of color. Her mug clattered on the floor, ceramics splintering like nerves. "How did you?" She didn't finish. Tom looked up sharply, brows pinched. "What meeting are you referring to, Hillary?" I blinked slowly, tilting my head to the side. "Was there a meeting?" "I dreamed there was one in the den." "I saw you all there. You were all wearing blue." "No one had worn blue. That was just to rattle them." Tom stood pacing. "If she's bluffing, we're in trouble. If she's not." He didn't finish either. Emily, ever the peacemaker, tried to smile. "It's just her mind playing tricks, old memories blending with dreams." But she was sweating. I noticed it. So did Oliver, who had crept to the doorway and watched them with wide, suspicious eyes. That night, I heard a strange hiss from the backyard. I followed the sound to the trash bins and lifted the lid. The handkerchief I'd made for Oliver, embroidered and wrapped carefully, was inside, singed at the edges, still faintly smoking. Emily had burned it. I didn't touch it. I just closed the lid, walked back inside, and wrote 2 new entries in my private notebook. Emily, no mercy. Oliver must protect. Then I went to the safe, pulled out the will I'd written years ago, balanced, kind, trusting, and I tore it in half, then in half again. The sound of it shredding wasn't satisfying. It hurt, actually. It hurt more than I thought it would to let go of the version of myself who believed my children would earn what I had saved. I opened a fresh page and began to write again. This time, I left the beneficiary lines blank. I would fill them when someone proved they deserved more than a bloodline. I tucked the new draft back in the safe, wrapped in the same cloth that once held Jonathan's wedding band, and replaced the key under the loose plank in the back room. That same night, as the house settled into silence, Laura knocked on my bedroom door, not gently, not lovingly. It was the knock of someone trying to hold herself together. "Mom," she said, stepping in, eyes narrowed. "What do you remember?" I looked up from the Bible I wasn't reading and smiled faintly. "Do I know you?" I asked, letting my voice lilt just slightly. He exhaled hard, angry. "I don't believe you. I think you're faking it." I blinked slowly and folded the book closed. "Wouldn't that be terrible?" I murmured. "If someone wasn't as helpless as she seemed?" Laura stormed out, and I waited. Still not ready, not yet, but I could feel it coming. The snap of something inevitable, the way a dam grows before it breaks. It was a Sunday, which somehow made it worse. Jonathan always insisted Sundays were sacred. Not in the religious sense, but in the way a man who worked with numbers and codes still believed in one quiet day a week for rest, family, and honesty. He used to make pancakes with too much butter, play vinyls from the 70s, and read the paper in his robe, humming as if the world was good and steady. This Sunday, my family came over with casserole dishes and tension, dressed up as civility. Laura brought that kale salad no one actually liked. Tom wore a blazer like he had just come from court, and Brian had a suspicious stiffness in his jaw, either from guilt or from another poor decision. Emily arrived last, breathless and bright-eyed, holding a tray of lemon bars and compliments. The table was already set when I came down. I moved a little slower than usual because they expected that. The role still had to be played until the curtain call. They seated me at the head, as they always had, but this time it felt ceremonial, like they were preparing for a final blessing, one they wouldn't have to ask for much longer. "We thought it'd be nice to have dinner together before that transition," Laura said, pouring herself a glass of wine. She didn't offer to anyone else. "You've had a lot on your mind lately, Mom, and we've all been thinking it's time." Tom gave a short nod, eyes narrowed with false concern. "We've made the arrangements. A facility with the best care. You'll have your own room, activities, staff around the clock." Emily chimed in with a practiced smile, and no more stress, no more worrying about cooking, falling, forgetting appointments. I spooned mashed potatoes onto my plate and said nothing. Oliver sat across from me, smaller than usual, somehow his eyes darting between faces as if trying to understand the rules of a game no one had explained to him. Brian reached for the bread, voice too casual. We sold the Honda. Used the cash to put down the deposit for the place. Figured you weren't driving anymore anyway. I looked up at him fully, deliberately. His eyes faltered, flicking downward, like he'd seen something shameful in a reflection he didn't recognize. I didn't say you could sell it, I said, and the room went still. There was a pause. Laura laughed, sharp and uncomfortable. Oh, come on, Mom. You don't even remember what day it is. I straightened in my chair. The slowness left my voice. The fog evaporated from my gaze. It's Sunday, I said evenly, and you've all come here to erase me. Forks froze midair. Brian set his down with a metallic clink. Tom opened his mouth, then shut it again. Laura's face twisted. What game is this? I reached beneath the tableware. A bag rested on the floor. I pulled out a small portable speaker, black, old, but powerful. I pressed play. Voices filled the room. Their voices. Brian, impatient. She's not gonna live forever. We can't wait on her forever, Laura calculated. Once she's out of the house, we list it immediately, quietly, before she confuses anyone with her stories. Tom, if we use my firm, we can establish guardianship and bypass the asset freeze. Emily, just don't let the kid get attached. She's not stable anymore. Silence followed, thick and absolute, the kind that only falls when something sacred has just shattered. Laura stood up suddenly. You were spying on us. I stared at her. I was surviving. Tom tried to recover this. This isn't what it sounds like. Context matters. Those conversations were taken out of. I cut him off. Out of what? The months I spent pretending to forget my name? Or the days I listened to my own children negotiate the price of my dignity? Emily dropped her fork, voice tight. We were trying to protect you by stealing from me? I asked. By burning a gift I made for your son? Her face blanched. Laura turned to Tom. You said she was incompetent. You said the doctor had signed. He was going to, Tom snapped, sweat beading at his temple. We just needed the behavioral records. You said she couldn't string a sentence together because that's what you wanted to believe. I said. Emily rounded on Brian. You were supposed to handle her. You said she'd sign the house over. We did all of this for you. She screamed. Because you're too much of a failure to take care of your own mother without turning her into a bank account. Brian's mouth fell open. You said you loved her. I said. What I had to, she hissed. Oliver stood up. He was shaking. You all lied to her, he said, voice high, breaking. You lied, and you're mean, and I hate all of you. He ran to me, arms wrapping around my waist with the kind of desperation that only comes when a child realizes something awful has happened and no one is going to fix it. I held him close, burying my face in his hair. Then I stood slowly, with him still clutching me. My voice shook for the first time, not from fear but from the kind of grief that never stops bruising. I believed, I said, looking at each of them, that at least one of you still loved me. Not for what I had, not for what I could give, just for being your mother. Laura looked away. Tom was already pulling out his phone, likely calling someone for damage control. Brian sat frozen. Emily wiped a tear, but even that seemed rehearsed. I didn't wait for their apologies because I knew they weren't coming. The house was quiet again, but this time it was the kind of quiet I chose, not the hush of tension waiting to explode behind closed doors, not the silence of fear wrapped in pretense, just peace, the kind that follows a storm. They left in pieces after that dinner. Laura grabbed her coat without looking at me. Tom stood stiffly, mumbling something about legal misinterpretation, liability mistakes. Brian disappeared into the night with no words. Emily didn't say goodbye. She pulled Oliver's hand with more force than care, but the boy twisted free and ran back to hug me one last time. I still want the compass, he whispered against my sweater. It's already yours, I whispered back. 2 weeks passed before the letters went out. one to each of them: Laura, Brian, and even Tom, though he was only family by law and illusion. I wrote them by hand using the stationery Jonathan had given me the Christmas before he passed. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with our initials embossed in the corner, H and J. I sealed each envelope, untouched by apology, but filled with something far heavier: truth. I left them blank on the outside, no names, no accusations, just waiting for hands brave enough to open them. None of them did. I'd asked my attorney, a kind woman with tired eyes and an efficient kindness, to arrange the transfer of my entire estate to a charitable foundation I renamed in Jonathan's honor, the JM Foundation for Education and Dignity in Aging. Every cent from my husband's old shares, every account, the house, the land, the car they had sold behind my back, all of it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted the narrative rewritten, not for me, but for the students who could not afford school, for the elders cast aside in locked rooms and called burdens by their own blood. And Oliver, my one unspoiled light in the chaos, he would have a scholarship fund in his name, the Oliver Compass Grant for Curious Children with Steady Hearts. I included a note for him in the foundation file: "This is so you'll always find your way, even if the people around you lose theirs." The fallout came in slow waves. Laura tried to sue, of course. She hired a firm with marble floors and a website full of smiling estate experts, but the documents were airtight. The timeline documented, the recordings undeniable. Her case was dismissed before it reached a judge. Her name would hover in Google searches now, tethered to a failed guardianship claim and whispers of financial exploitation. Brian, already deep in debt, collapsed under the weight of unpaid loans and mounting interest. He called me once, or maybe twice. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because I knew he wasn't ready to speak as a son, only as someone drowning, flailing for anything that floated. Emily left him soon after, took their savings, the car, and their silence. Oliver stayed with his maternal grandparents. I sent him birthday cards through a third party, never with money, always with stories. Tom's name surfaced in a quiet investigation into legal ethics. One of my recordings, the one where he coached Laura on how to nudge my diagnosis, made its way into the hands of a journalist anonymously. I didn't send it, but someone did. He was quietly let go, his firm citing a misalignment of values. No charges, no headlines, but the kind of stain that doesn't wash out of a resume. As for me, I packed what little I still cared to carry and left. Drove the U-Haul herself, refusing to let anyone else take the wheel. We didn't go far, just 2 hours up the coast to a town where salt air softened the edges of memory. No one knew my name at the grocery store. We found a little white house with blue shutters and wild daisies growing like children along the fence line. The sea was a short walk away, and I could hear it at night when the windows were cracked open. I slept deeply for the first time in years. I began volunteering at the library, then at a local school that ran programs for underprivileged students. They called me Miss Hillary and didn't ask for anything except stories. I gave them plenty. Once a week, I taught a small class on writing. It wasn't anything official, just folding chairs, eager eyes, and the scent of old books. I told them that writing was not about showing off what you know, but surviving what you feel. They nodded like they understood. One evening, near the end of a lesson about character and silence, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "How do you forgive someone who doesn't want to be forgiven?" I looked out the window at the setting sun and said softly, "You don't do it for them. You do it so you can keep walking." They were quiet after that. I think they felt the truth in it, even if they didn't know the story. Before we left, one of the students, maybe 16, maybe 17, asked me why I'd never published anything. I smiled. I wrote 3 decades of essays in red ink. That was enough for me. At home that night, I lit a candle near Jonathan's photo. The glass frame glowed amber in the low light, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, humming off-key, laughing at his own terrible jokes. I sat at my desk and began to write, not a will, not a warning, but a journal for no one and for everyone. The first line read, "Silence is not stupidity. Forgiveness is not weakness, but trust once broken, that doesn't come back." And I kept writing, even as the waves hummed beyond the windows and the wind carried no more lies.